Hey everybody, it's Party Elite here with a review of Ancestors Legacy, a squad-based RTS set in and around the Dark Ages, releasing for PC and Xbox One, developed by Destructive Creations. The wonderful folks at Destructive Creations have given me early access and a review key, full disclosure, but as always, that does nothing to affect my opinion on the product, and I'm pretty sure that'll be fairly clear. To start things off, here's a little insight as to who I am, because I believe reviews are very subjective, and the lens of the reviewer matters in understanding where the thoughts are coming from. Strategy gaming has been a big part of my life from a very early age, whether it was the Civilization games starting from the first one, Age of Empires, Age of Mythology, Company of Heroes, Europa Universalis, or the Total War series. It's a genre I always look to for something interesting and challenging. I love the opportunity to fail, and I love the pressure of approaching situations with logic and actual tactical or strategic implications. Paramount to my strategy gaming experience is depth and complexity. With all that said, let's explore Ancestors Legacy like a Norseman at Lindisfarne. Ancestors Legacy, despite early impressions that seem to focus around the Viking invasions of the British Isles, actually explores a few different conflict zones through its campaign storylines, allowing for the inclusion of 4 fairly distinct factions in both campaign and skirmish mode. A system that works as a multiplayer and single-player mode, so you can keep the legacy alive well after the campaign is over. With 2 storylines per faction, you'll find yourself exploring the times from the late 700s to the 1300s or so, with campaigns as the Vikings, the Anglo-Saxons, the Germans, and the Slavs, exploring Vikings on the British Isles and in Rus, internal conflicts of the Anglo-Saxons, trouble in the Holy Roman Empire, and the wars of Polish and Kievan Rus. And each of these 4 factions are just different enough to make them interesting from a mechanical and visual perspective, giving different build orders, different strengths and weaknesses, in some cases access to unique unit types, and different storylines to follow over the course of a handful of missions each. It's all pretty standard of fare as far as expectations go, though I am glad to see the lack of homogeneity that could have easily troubled the game. Of the 8 campaigns, 2 will be made available for free post-launch, and the rest have been an interesting experience. Most of the first set of missions under the Vikings act as tutorials, and then the game throws you into the woods with nothing more than a starting point, objectives, and your wits. The learning curve isn't very steep, which is great, but the difficulty curve felt like it jumped up every so often. Still entirely manageable, and as somebody who likes a challenge, it was very appealing to me. The objectives also managed to keep things fresh. For example, I didn't expect to have a sneak around in a village in disguise mission or sabotage an enemy camp mission, and adding to all this are the set pieces that keep things interesting as well, such as the mission that starts with an ambush.
And we didn't even have to scare them. They were so afraid of our weapons. They are attacking us! Hilfe! It's an ambush! Protect the Kaiser!
There were enough opportunities to try something a little different here and there, and the game gives you the opportunity to take advantage of its mechanics, though at times you can simply ignore some of them, especially in the later parts of longer missions. Over time, however, I felt things were a little repetitive despite all the interesting elements. The stories were executed well enough, but eventually some of what once felt fresh started feeling like a chore. Now, to be fair, I have saturated my playtime with Ancestors Legacy, and that certainly has an effect on this factor. A major issue I faced was the snowballing effect. For many of the longer missions, and they range from 30 to 60 minutes depending on how patient you are, I often felt like the AI didn't keep up and didn't really threaten me outside of predetermined locations, like a well-defended bridge with watchtowers, or when I was outnumbered because of a scripted event. Many times the AI would venture out and be aggressive, and when I didn't have 3 watchtowers and a unit of archers guarding my forward base, it would be trouble. But the moment I got myself set up, the AI continued to trickle in at the same rate, making for easy pickings. And it's rare, but sometimes the AI will just sit there and eat ranged fire, or not charge into a nearby engagement to provide support to allies. Even rarer are a few pathfinding bugs here and there, but I hope these will be fixed by the time the game launches. On top of all that, a small issue in the grand scale of things, but one that bothered me constantly, was the inconsistent voice acting. At times, it'd be great. At times, it was just bad at best.
Have you heard this one? What kind of Viking ship doesn't sink? Friendship, ha ha ha! Friendship, ha ha ha!
Some of the accents were confusing.
Listen, we have to find and disarm all the traps around here before we can move further. But Dad, I can't wait to get my hands on those bastards.
Son, you have to understand. If we're reckless, we die.
Some words were misspoken.
Cavalieri?
Sometimes tone and cadence were all off.
Open the gate, bitte. I need to get in.
And when I'm enjoying the visual experience and the music and sound effects are fantastic to match, the voices just pulled me out of the experience. The writing also flipped between great and questionable at times, which is funny because the individual unit lines always sound great. Now, skirmish mode allows you to find quick matches, ranked matches, go browsing through a lobby or host a game or lobby of your own, allowing for a variety of ways to get some PvP action going. If you'd like to practice against the AI, you have the option of taking to the field with or against bots that range in difficulty from angsty teenager to destroyer of worlds. A great range to have, and as somebody who enjoys playing against the AI every once in a while, it's nice to have the option of being challenged here, at least before I've perfected timings and build orders. 2 game modes are available to play, the typical base destruction mode called Annihilation, and the ticket-based mode, Domination. The former we're all familiar with, destroy all key enemy buildings to win, while the latter involves holding on to more resource points, or villages, than the enemy to slowly reduce their ticket count to 0. Even though these sound fairly typical, Ancestors Legacy manages to make the whole process a lot more interesting. Resource points in single-player and skirmish mode are little villages that you have to capture from a neutral force. They'll be positioned in strategic locations, with high ground or walls or barricades. Each one is a little different, and each one provides strategic options. You can construct up to 3 watchtowers at each one, and each one also gives access to up to 3 types of resources that you need. Wood and iron to recruit, build, research, upgrade, etc., and food to maintain morale. When you actually want to tap into these resources, you need to recruit villagers at the village, and sometimes these villagers have to work a field or mine or yard far away from any protection, making them plausible and easy targets for harassment to remove access to the resource they were harvesting. If you're not able to respond with a defensive army in time, you can always ring the alarm back at the village center to get everybody back home. They'll even help defend it. This village system brings life to the map and also adds some more layers to a system we've seen many times before, creating some pretty interesting possibilities at times. At launch, there are 10 maps available, ranging from tight 2-player maps to large 6-player maps, and they are quite varied and interesting in their layouts, each of them affording different opportunities. I certainly hope that more will become available over time, and the game could certainly gain a lot from having some custom map-making capabilities. For me, skirmishes are a big pull to a game like this, whether against people or the AI. A good selection of maps and factions can stretch the life of a game. Where the game really and truly shines is in its implementation of tactical elements and the seemingly living, breathing world that the action takes place in. And for single-player fans, the fact that the AI seems to understand and utilize these concepts, especially visible in multiplayer where, you know, for sure, it isn't just scripted behavior. The level of depth here has taken me by surprise, as I wasn't quite expecting it, and I look forward to seeing the options get fully explored by different players in different ways. And I'll be honest, for all the middling opinions I had about the campaign, these factors here, and the potential it represents for interesting multiplayer, are massive positives. Just as a few quick examples, we see the implementation of a day-night cycle and a weather system that can change your approach. At night, soldiers whisper as they skulk about with reduced line of sight, making it easier to sneak around. Fire lights up regions, so if you decide to equip your troops with torches, you might be able to see farther, but your units become easier to spot. The light they emit even glows through the fog of war. Stand next to a burning building and you'll be exposed to units that are sneaking around, potentially setting up an ambush. If it's raining or snowing, your units will be moving slower and buildings will take more effort to set alight, so you might want to consider your timing between weather and time of day before you march into battle. And even as you're moving about the battlefield, keep an eye out for swamps and shallow water that slows units down, and bushes, tall grass, or wooded areas, all of which allow units to hide as they move about undetected or fire away while hidden. Trees also provide safety from enemy range support, and given the units that the different factions have access to at different times, knowing your enemy and knowing yourself can ensure you never lose 1,000 battles. But why bother with any of this? Because your positioning, your aggression, and your maneuvering all matters. Morale is a huge part of the engagements in Ancestors Legacy, as it should be. While setting up on the high ground or taking advantage of choke points or standard of fare, Ancestors Legacy adds value to flanking maneuvers, outnumbering, friendly fire, and rear charges by implementing this morale system. You'll want to seek out cover to hide it. You'll want to set up traps and wait for the enemy to fall in before charging forward, and you'll sometimes want to let them through so you can get a rear or flanking charge set up. In some cases, you'll completely avoid a head-on engagement for a while, going around picking off enemy farms to reduce their food and damage morale before going into battle. The existence of these options alone make for interesting gameplay opportunities. It's a matter of time before we see how much room there is for actual exploration. Another interesting decision is to reduce the amount of base building in the game. Each building, whether in campaign or skirmish mode, has a preordained location. This reduces the amount of time spent planning building placement and also removes the possibility of facing annoying base layouts with walls made of houses and the like. I wouldn't want this for all of my strategy games, but Ancestors Legacy has a clear emphasis on the action up front at all times, and this approach means you can give orders to make buildings no matter where your camera is, especially with the panel at the bottom right and its multiple tabs and hotkeys. From an audio-visual perspective, the game looks and sounds great for the most part. Apart from some questionable voice acting and a user interface that could use some work, everything's great. I've already talked about the voice acting in great detail, but as far as the UI and UX is concerned, there are some things that can be turned off, like these words if you don't like them, but some things can't be avoided, such as the fact that you can't actually keep a unit selected to see extra details by hovering over them down here, or the fact that icons for the resource points don't feel like they belong, especially on the minimap. Apart from these little things though, the game looks and sounds fantastic. Zooming in, using the action camera to see the fighting in detail really shows the amount of love and work put in, not just to the unit models and animations, but also the terrain, the camera, the structures, the post effects, the audio that ties it all together, everything. Ancestors Legacy is a hard game to summarize. There's a lot going on that's absolutely fantastic as far as the mechanics and aesthetics are concerned. They come together especially nicely in multiplayer. In single player, there were some issues. Some stupid AIs, some late repetitiveness, a bit of snowballing, some voice acting issues, but the stories keep things fun and the set pieces can be quite interesting. They work to keep things fresh, or at least try to, but I did find myself needing a break from single player every so often. Perhaps hilariously, I would just turn to skirmish against the AI because I found that an enjoyable change of scenery and pace. The game is a lot of fun. If you're looking at it solely for single player, you may be left wanting. But if you're even remotely interested in the multiplayer aspect, this is definitely a game to consider. If you enjoy tactical games like Company of Heroes, and you enjoy the time period, I'd say you should definitely give this game a try. I'm not one for number scores, they always feel arbitrary, and they're used to compare titles on completely unrelated aspects, so I hope this review has given you enough insight to make a call based on your own tastes and preferences. I think this one is worth a shot, and I'd like to see other historical RTS games take some cues from it. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I hope this review helps you in making a decision. If you're interested in more strategy gaming content, make sure you subscribe to this channel. If you pick up Ancestors Legacy, let me know your thoughts. And if you're still not sure, feel free to ask questions down below. Till next time, cheers.